And now, from the University of Virginia Center for Politics.
All right, well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Tyler Lucas. I'm a fourth-year government major here at the University of Virginia and the chairman of the Young Americans for Freedom chapter. I'm incredibly honored to moderate tonight's event, Your Vote is Your Voice, featuring our distinguished guest, the Honorable Paul Harris, Delegate Ann Farrell Tata, and Delegate David Owen. But before I introduce to you our panelists tonight, I'd first like to thank the Center for Politics for partnering with YAF to put on this important discussion. In particular, I'd like to thank the director of the center, Professor Larry Sabato, the assistant director, Ken Stroop, and our events coordinator, Mr. Glenn Crossman. Thank you as well to our excellent YAF Executive Board for their valuable assistance. So without any further ado, let's introduce ourselves to tonight's panelists. Mr. Paul C. Harris is a native of Charlottesville, Virginia. Mr. Harris served as Deputy Assistant Attorney General at the U.S. Department of Justice, where he led a team of 175 attorneys and oversaw all tort litigation for the United States government. Mr. Harris's federal service was preceded by his public service at the state level, where he was twice elected to the Virginia House of Delegates, representing the 58th District of the historic seat once held by Thomas Jefferson. In 1997, he became the first African-American Republican elected to the Virginia legislature in over a century. Mr. Harris was appointed to University of Virginia's Board of Visitors by Governor Youngkin in 2023. Delegate Ann Farrell Tata represents the 99th District, which is a significant portion of the city of Virginia Beach and the Virginia House of Delegates. She is a graduate of Florida State University, and during her time in office, she has passed important legislation, including supporting not only her local community, but also the military, foster care children, and fighting human trafficking and anti-Semitism. And finally, Delegate David Owen represents Virginia's 57th District in the House of Delegates and comes from a proud lineage of Virginians. He graduated from the University of Virginia with a BS in civil engineering, then worked in prominent positions in the construction industry. As a state legislator, Delegate Owen focuses on reducing red tape, supporting small businesses, and providing common sense, bipartisan solutions on the issues that matter most to Virginians. Panelists, thank you so much for joining us here tonight. Let's start off by talking a bit about each of y'all's backgrounds and early experiences with voting. So I guess, Mr. Harris, we can start with you first. What inspired you to initially run for office? And over your political career, how have you personally witnessed the power of the ballot box?
Thank you, Tyler. First, I want to say I'm delighted to be here and thank the Center for Politics for putting this together. And it's great to see all of the students here this afternoon. You all could be doing any number of different things at this time, but you chose to be here. And so I really do appreciate that and commend you for being here. Charlottesville is my hometown, as you said, and I'm one of those weird people. I've known what I've wanted to do since I was 10 years old. And that was 1994, and Watergate was the talk of the town and really the talk of the nation. At the time, I didn't understand what it was, but I kept pinging and asking my fourth grade teacher, Dan Parks, please explain to me what this Watergate is all about. And that was at the same time we were taking Virginia history in class. And he had a wonderful way of weaving current events into the classroom. So I became really enthralled about Watergate from that point on, and that was my introduction into politics. Up until that point, the folks at my church had always told me, when you grow up, get yourself a suit and tie job, get yourself some education, nobody can ever take that away from you. But they never really explained what that meant. Then finally, I see people in suits and ties on the news and the newspapers, and they were participating in the Watergate hearings. And so I thought to myself, oh, they must mean I should be a politician. So then I started to ask, well, what does it take to become a politician? And started reading really short biographies about politicians, and saw that many of them were lawyers before they became politicians. Many had served in the military, and that sort of became a blueprint for how I wanted to live out my life. So I've known I wanted to be in politics since I was 10 years old. And I first got started in politics when I was 11. So I ran for president of the Greenbrier Elementary School Ecology Club when I was 11, and I had a clear mandate. We were going to plant the first trees in this new park in Charlottesville called Penn Park. And I ran on that platform and won the position of president of the Ecology Club at Greenbrier, and we fulfilled our promise by planting the first trees in Penn Park. That was in 1975. And then my love for politics continued to evolve. I became president of the student body at my university, Hampton University. I was president of the Student Government Association there. And as you mentioned, not long after I got out of the military and law school, a seat opened up in the House of Delegates here in 1997, and I thought, why not run for it? At that time, I'd already served in the military. I had my law degree, so the next thing was to pursue public office. I had no idea that it would all happen so quickly. I was 33 at the time of my election, but in 1997, I won the seat in the House of Delegates, and that was a wonderful experience, and we'll talk more about that. But I don't see how anybody cannot like politics. Politics is so fun. It's so, you get to meet so many fascinating people, and then when you're in public office, you actually get to make laws and help shape public policy. So it's been the thrill of my life to be involved in public policy and involved in politics for so many years, and I look forward to finding new ways to stay engaged. But thank you all for being here this evening.
So, Tyler, thank you so much for having us, and Larry Sabato, I'm so thankful that he made this possible tonight. It's a real true honor to be here. I've always had an interest in politics. I never thought I would be the candidate. I'm actually an introvert, and public speaking was never my thing, but I loved being a part of it. In fact, when growing up in Florida, my dad was an Army chaplain, so we really moved around a lot, but then he retired and we ended up in Florida. And at the time, the drinking age was 18. And so all my friends couldn't wait to turn 18 to get their ID. I couldn't wait to turn 18 so I could register to vote. I was so excited about voting. And I interned, when I was at Florida State, I interned in the governor's office. At the time, it was Governor Bob Graham, before y'all were born. But I've just always really loved being around it. As Paul said, it's invigorating and it's interesting. And but I was always in the background, always supporting candidates. My husband and I worked on a lot of campaigns, helped, hosted events. I actually come from a long line of politicians, believe it or not. I'm a direct descendant of Patrick Henry's sister, Elizabeth Henry, and I have 5 relatives that have served as governors of Virginia. So wow. Crazy, I know, it's kind of crazy. But never did I think I was going to be the candidate. And my father-in-law, who Paul served with, I believe, served in the House for 30 years. So really been around it, always in the background. And in 2021, they asked me to run, and I said, absolutely not, no way. And I told them I would pray about it and talk to my husband about it. And my husband said, absolutely not. He said no, because he just saw, he thought they would be mean to me. He saw, because you do take some hits, you got to have tough skin. But I really felt like I was called to do it. And I grew up with 4 brothers, so I was like, okay, bring it on, it's okay. But as Paul said, it really is a true honor. It's a high honor because of not only legislation, that is one part of it, and it's a big part of it, but it's also about you have the ability to bring stakeholders together and make things happen and make things better, a lot of times without legislation, without budgets. And it's been incredibly rewarding, especially because, as Tyler mentioned, the things I'm interested in are things like foster care and human trafficking. And to be able to see actual things and make lives better for people that have really suffered has been just an incredible honor. So I'm happy they asked me to do it.
That's pretty good for an introvert. I'll tell you. So at 10, no, I didn't know what I wanted to do, so you were way ahead of me. I never thought I'd be in politics. Although, when I graduated from the university, I went to work as a construction engineer for a major oil company, Texaco USA, and spent 40 years in the construction business. And I was essentially in politics that whole time, whether I was actually running for office or not. I mean, when you're in business, you're in politics as well, whether you're dealing with your customers, whether you're dealing with vendors, whether you're dealing with banks, but everything's about working with other people, negotiating to accomplish goals and get things done. My father, when he retired after 40 years working for the state, worked for 25 years at the General Assembly as a committee clerk when your father-in-law was there. And I was sitting there was a vacant seat that came available in Henrico County, and my dad said, "You've got good name recognition, you ought to think about running." I looked at him and said, "Why would I do that?" I was still working full-time, and I don't know how the delegates that are down there that still have full-time jobs and busy careers are able to do this. So fast forward a few more years, 3 years ago, almost 4 years ago now, I stopped working full-time. Still do little projects now and then. And when we had redistricting, the 57th district was vacant. And again, someone called me and said, "Why don't you think about running?" And my first response is, "Why would I do that? Got a pretty good life. I don't need to do that." But I thought about it for a while. I said, look, to myself, I've had a good life. I've been very successful in life. And I'm looking around at things that are going on, and I think opportunities are becoming fewer for our young people in graduating from high school and college. And I said, it's my turn to give back. I reaped the benefits of having an environment that I was able to succeed in, able to do well in business, and able to raise a family, and it was my turn to give back. So that's how I got into politics. I did have some background that I should have known I was going to end up there when I was in high school. I don't know if y'all know, American Legion has this thing called Boys State, which I went to, and I got to be selected to go to Boys Nation up there as representing Virginia as a senator, and happened to be up there the summer when Richard Nixon actually resigned. So, yes, I'm old. But you know, you kind of look back at all those things and you go, gosh, I guess it was a path to lead me here. I was just elected for the first time last year. There are 100 of us in the House of Delegates, and I'm sure all of you understand that out of those 100 seats, there are only a handful, 10 at the most, maybe 6, maybe 8, that are competitive. All the others, before the election happens, we know it's going to be an R or a D. So those, myself and the others that are in the competitive seats, we have kind of a different approach we have to take. Does that make us more moderate and more able to work with others? I don't know if it really does or not. That's my nature anyway. This past year, as I said, my first term, out of 100, 34 of us were new. Talk about term limits. You know, we had people who couldn't even find the restroom, and you know, we're running around going, what's a committee meeting? You know, so we all had to learn very quickly, and we had orientation, which was good. I had the advantage that I've been going down to the General Assembly on behalf of my businesses for about 20 years. So I knew a lot of the existing delegates. I knew how a lot of things worked. But the first thing I did was make sure I made friends with all of the 34 of the new delegates, because I'm a Republican, we were in the minority, and if you're going to get anything done, you got to work with the other side, especially when we're in a 51-49. So that was the key for me, is to make sure I got to know other people quickly, and I was fortunate as a freshman delegate in the minority to get 2 bills passed, and that's because I went and worked the bills and talked to people on the other side, and I had things that were good policy. Now, I got some killed just because I was in the minority, and that's how it works, but getting 2 bills passed, I was ecstatic about. Nothing fancy, but they were small business bills that needed to happen. So, and Tyler, thank you for that kind introduction, I was going, who is that guy? Because I didn't realize I'd done all that, but thank you for all that.
Well, you're very welcome, and thank you once again for being here tonight. And we really appreciate you sharing your backgrounds, and hopefully that's pretty inspirational for younger students who kind of thinking about running for office one day and giving back to the community. So let's turn now toward addressing some of the common misconceptions about voting that are held by many Americans today. Often one of the most commonly cited arguments about why people should vote is the notion that in the grand scheme of things, with over 330 million Americans, my vote will be drowned out and simply won't count. How do you counter this argument, a view that's held by many college students, in order to try to convince them to go out and vote? Would anyone like to tackle that first?
Well, since I'm in one of the competitive districts and understand every vote counts, I mean, the election that I won, over 33,000 votes were cast. I won by 721 votes. And if you look back, gosh, 4 years ago, the General Assembly, there was a election, the last election to determine who was going to have the majority in the House and the General Assembly.
David Yancey's election.
David Yancey's
Yeah.
election. Put two names in a bowl, drew the name out of the bowl, and that determined who was in the majority in the Virginia House of Delegates. So every vote counts. Now, unfortunately, in some districts that, as I mentioned, that aren't as competitive, but when we have these statewide elections and we're looking at electoral, every vote does count. And if you want to be able to voice your opinion and complain about things, you need to vote. Whether you vote for my side or the other side, I don't care. But please get out and vote, because it's your civic duty, and every vote does count. And as we have elections that are becoming more competitive, and in Virginia with some of the election laws we have with all the early voting, there's plenty of time. There's no excuse not to be able to get out there and vote. You can get an absentee ballot easily. So voting is easy. We're not going to make it so you can vote on your phone anytime soon, I hope, because I'm not sure we want that. But please get out and vote. So I'm sure that
Well, the only thing I'll add to that is when I came in 22, we were in the majority just by a very small, narrow margin, and several, I think 3 or 4 of the races were all within 100, 200 votes. So there are a lot that are these really competitive races. The other thing that I think really is interesting, and honestly I think is really sad, so I really push my district when I run. I've run twice, I'll run again next year, is to encourage people to vote, because I looked historically in my district, which is a more Republican district, but when I look back year after year, even in presidential races, less than 50% of the population votes. I just find that staggering. And so when Youngkin ran, ironically, there was like 55%, and really across the state, in my district as well. But that was highly unusual. And it just grieves me, because I think this is such a gift. This government, this form of government, the Constitutional Republic, is a gifted government, and we have to steward this gift. And the only way we can do that is to get out and vote.
Yeah, and I would add to that, we do have a Republican, small r, form of government. And what that means is that the government derives its power from the people.
The people.
And when we forget that, we lose sight of an essential, a sort of core part of our constitutional democratic Republican system of government. So we have the privilege of voting and expressing our ideas and letting the government know sort of what the will of the people is. And it's important that government leaders get that. So getting out to vote and voting for candidates who stand for the kinds of ideals and principles and policy positions that you believe in is part of that participatory democracy that is so essential to having a vibrant government that is actually responsive to the people. But if you don't vote, then you wind up with an elite class of politicians who feel like, well, we can just sort of do whatever we want to do. They don't feel the need or the impulse to respond to the will of the people, because the will of the people has not been adequately and fully expressed. You do that by getting out to vote. And I would just add, starting that practice early is really what I would strongly encourage, because it becomes easier, you develop a pattern and a system for being personally accountable for voting, in your adult life. And I think that's important because you want to see your kids ultimately. One day when you get married and have kids, you want to also influence them to be a part of the democratic process. So voting is a privilege, but it is also a responsibility. We often forget that in our system of government. We have rights that we all have, we have privileges, but we also, as citizens, have responsibilities. Voting is one of those responsibilities, and serving on juries is another example of a civic responsibility. But so it's a responsibility, but it's also important for informing the direction that policymakers have in how they're going to craft policies that affect our lives on a day-to-day basis.
And I would challenge you to talk to your friends and your family to encourage them to vote as well. And if you really want to understand, find a candidate that you like, go work the polls for them one day, and watch the people that are coming up to vote. And I've worked the polls a lot, and it's very disheartening in a lot of cases where people are walking up to the polls to vote. They've determined they're going to vote. That's step one. You got to show up. But a lot of people, when I say working the polls, I'm standing out there campaigning for whoever, handing out sample ballots. A large majority of the people walking up to vote have not decided who they're going to vote for. They don't know everything that's on the ballot. I mean, we've got a ballot right now with a constitutional amendment on it. Everybody knows that we've got a president. Most people know we got a U.S. senator. Most people know they have a congressman on there. Very few people I've talked to know there's a constitutional amendment. So we've got people showing up to vote on a constitutional amendment that will change the Constitution for the Commonwealth of Virginia, and they're reading it for the first time. And let me be clear, they're not always written so they're easy to understand what a yes vote or a no vote means. So A, you have to show up. B, be educated when you show up and know who you're going to vote for. And again, engage your family and friends to help them and encourage them. Because, as Delegate Tata said, hardly half the people vote. In some districts, only 17,000 people vote sometimes out of 80,000. It's mind-boggling to me why people don't exercise their right. I know everybody else in this room does that. And should I ask the question, who's voted in here already?
Sure, why not?
Who in here has voted already?
Raise your hand.
There you go. And
pretty good.
as I've heard in the next question there is, what's wrong with the rest of you, right?
Or were you surprised about the Constitution Amendment question? Who was surprised about that?
Yeah,
Now, go ahead.
sorry.
I was going to say, you can always go online to your local registrar's office and see a sample ballot before you go in. That's usually the best way to know that, so.
Yeah, very well said. This next question kind of continues along the theme of state politics and being engaged, in Virginia politics. So Virginia is one of only a few states that has an election every year. This means that there's not only a general election every year in November, but also various primary elections throughout the spring and summer months. Many young people, particularly college students, say that it's too difficult to keep up with all of these dates and often choose not to vote as a result. What would you say to them about the importance of not only voting in presidential elections, such as this year, but also in off-year state elections?
Well, actually, Paul had a great answer before when he said, get in the habit. I mean, I personally, people always say to me like, oh gosh, you have to run every 2 years. I like that because it keeps me in touch with my constituents. It keeps me fresh. It keeps me in front of them. It keeps me engaged. And, and it reminds people that, you have to do this on a regular basis. But I think it's good to have, I like that we have an election every year because it does keep you engaged, and it gets people out there to vote. You have to pay attention. Once you kind of get the rhythm of things, the Congress is every 2 years. I think the senators are a third, right? Mm-hmm. Governor every 4 years. I mean, there are a few things, House, when we run, everyone runs. The whole House runs every 2 years. So you can kind of pick up the rhythm on it. And then the local elections obviously are kind of different. But it keeps you you know, it keeps you out there doing it, so I like it.
Well, there's some years I like it better than others, but we do have an election every year in Virginia, and now that we have the 45 days of early voting, to
Yeah,
the
don't
comment
do that.
about it's confusing, we're wearing people out. And the people I'm talking about, the registrar's office in Henrico County, which I represent, last year, we were voting in 2023, there were people voting at the registrar's office almost from January 1 through June 21st because Congressman Keachin had passed. So they had to have a special election for him. So there's a primary for that with 45 days of early voting, then the general election for that. And then the person that won that vacated a state Senate seat. So there was a special election for that. So those poor registrars had people coming in and voting the whole time. And I was actually at the polls today in Henrico County for early voting and talking to the people out there working the polls, both on the Democrat side and the Republican side, and asked them, I said, y'all tired yet? And they said, yeah, this 45 days is long. Both sides think that. And unfortunately, we're wearing out our volunteers. If we only had an election every 4 years, it wouldn't be as impactful. But since we have an election every year, we finish up this election, those people that were out there working, I'm talking about volunteers that are out there supporting their candidates, and actually the people working in the registrar's office and doing all the early voting, they're worn out. They're worn out. So there's some things we need to look at. We don't want to make it harder for anybody to vote, but we also, and we could save a lot of money in the Commonwealth and maybe get rid of the car tax and some things like that. But we've got to look at some of our voting laws now. And if I'm getting into this too deep, please stop me, but one of the things that there was an issue today, when you, in Virginia now, you can walk in the day you're going to vote, early voting or election day, and register that day. And you get to vote a provisional ballot, and then they're going to verify that you're who you said you are. And if you were able to vote, your vote gets counted. But if you walk in today and walk in and say who you are, have no ID at all, no passport, no driver's license, no bill for water bill or electric bill, and nothing to prove who you are, you can still vote. All you have to do is sign an affidavit that you're who you are, and then you get to vote. And that's not a provisional ballot. It goes right in the machine. Now, unfortunately, if someone came in and voted for me, and then I come in to vote later, then I'm the one that has to cast a provisional ballot. So I'm not sure what else you can do in this country without a photo ID, but I think one of the things that we want to make sure that the people that have the right to vote in the right precinct can vote, and someone can't vote your ballot without that happening. If you are concerned about that, you can sign up for permanent absentee, and once your name's there, unless you bring that ballot in, nobody can vote your ballot for you. So there's some things that I think we need to clean up in some of our voting laws that will help. I don't think we have a lot of things going wrong currently, but we have the opportunity for those things to happen, and we'll make sure we close those down.
So I love the fact that there is an election every year in Virginia. I mean, if you're a political nerd like I am, you're in the best state in the union because there's always an election. There's always something to get riled up about. There's always a campaign that you can be a part of. And if you think you might have a future in politics at some point, you don't have to wait every 2 or 4 years for election fever to roll around. It's always with you here in Virginia. So you can always get involved with like a local city council campaign, or you can get involved in the House of Delegates campaign, or you can get involved in a congressional. Take your pick in Virginia. But you can get involved in any number of ways. And then, if you see a future for yourself in politics, you get started at a sort of a entry-level campaign and then sort of work your way up. But I love the fact that civic duty and active, engaged citizens as a part of their government is a feature, a prominent feature of life here in the Commonwealth. And I love being in the House for that reason, because we had to stand for election every 2 years. It could be every year as far as I was concerned, because I love the
I'm not buying into that.
None of my colleagues were buying into that either, but I love the campaigning. It was the best part of the experience for me, just getting out away from Richmond and getting out into the district and talking to different constituent groups. Sometimes they agree with some of your major policy positions, other times they disagree, and sometimes those meetings were some of the most fun meetings to participate in, because you have a competition of ideas. A healthy competition of ideas done in a civil way is the hallmark of our system of government. And the more young people get out and get engaged in that process, the better off it is. If you just leave it to, folks who've been in the party for 30, 40 years and used to doing things a certain way, it gets kind of old and stale. And people lose interest, and then they do something that you don't really like, and then you get riled up and want to get involved in the process. But so I love the fact that there is an election cycle, every year in Virginia, and one election in Virginia tends to influence the direction the next election is going to go. If you look at it historically, that's typically the way it's gone. So there is a sort of balance there in an odd way, historically speaking. But I love the fact that there is that vibrancy in the electoral process here in Virginia.
And the other important part about voting in every election, the people that vote in the presidential election, that vote has less impact on your day-to-day life
Yes.
than when you vote for your local supervisors or your local clerks or your local sheriffs or all those local offices. So the closer the government is to the people, the more influence it has on your life. So, and we have what's called these off-year elections, which originally was intended so fewer people voted in them. And as you said, you get stale, you get people who've been there for a long time. So if you think voting for the presidential election, you've done your civic duty, that's just a small piece of it. Voting in those local elections and the state elections have more influence and impact on your day-to-day life.
And having an election every year certainly helps the UVA Center for Politics as well. I do have to mention that.
And a whole lot of consultants.
Yes,
Yeah.
definitely.
When I decided to run, I'll just throw this in. When I decided to run in it was like fall of 1996. One of my first visits was to Larry Sabato's office. And I think his office, if I recall correctly, was in Cabell Hall at the time. And I walked in and I said, I'm thinking about running for the House of Delegates, et cetera. And it made his day. and he was like, oh, and he just went on talking about Virginia politics and how, the dynamics of politics in my district and yada, yada. And then he started pulling stuff off the shelf. And I walked out with like a handful of materials that he had given me. And I've always appreciated that. And it's a great resource to have the Center for Politics here in Charlottesville. They do great work, and Dr. Sabato has obviously done fantastic work over a number of decades, and I think he loves politics as much as I do, or I love politics as much as he does. So that was a memorable experience for me. So take advantage of that.
Certainly. Turning now from Virginia politics, let's take a look at the national election. We're now 12 days out from Election Day. Both sides are neck and neck. It's honestly a coin toss at this point. Both campaigns have used novel ways to turn out swing voters, such as Elon Musk's voting incentives in battleground states, and the Harris campaign's use of podcasts and TikTok to reach voters, particularly those that are young adults. What are some methods that you all have seen both Vice President Harris and former President Trump use to turn out the vote? And do you believe that either side has been successful so far?
Well, I think campaigns are increasingly becoming more and more creative in the way that they seek to reach voters. And a lot of that is just using technology. So, I mean, every day I get text messages from the campaigns. I get mail. Mail is pretty traditional. We'd spend a lot of money as candidates on mailers. And then knocking on doors, that's still being done to some extent. Trump holds a lot of rallies. I think Vice President Harris is calling on more, celebrities and musicians and athletes, and Trump is doing a little bit of that as well to help energize the youth vote and to get their campaigns overall energized about down the stretch. But that's just sort of been an evolving dynamic of campaigns over the years. I mean, when I ran, I had Paul Palooza, and we would have bands and frisbees and beer and stuff like that. But to reach young voters and get people jazzed up about the campaigns, and then there, always parades and different things that you can do to get excitement in your campaign. Momentum and energy is so important to a campaign. So I think candidates will always look for the newest thing or some creative way to get voters energized and to keep their own campaign staff and supporters energized about the campaign. But one of the things that I tried to do when I ran for office was to get sort of the soccer moms off the sidelines and into my campaign. And I made conscientious efforts to do exactly that. So the district I ran in, which is in Albemarle County, the Republican incumbent who held the seat decided not to run for reelection, so it was an open seat. But the Democrat candidate who had ran against him 2 years earlier in '95 got 47% of the vote. So I was stepping into what looked to be, this could be a close race. I mean, the Democrat who ran before in this Republican district got 47% of the vote. And so my goal was to, obviously win, but not only win, but bring in new energy, new people into the campaign. And the way I did that was it's real simple. I didn't spend one penny in negative advertising. And I just made the campaign fun. And so if it's fun and it's civil, you'd be surprised at how many people want to be a part of that process. People want no part of the process if it's negative, just throwing barbs at each other, and it's the same old, same old. So by making it new and exciting and fun in that way, we were able to win the same district with 63% of the vote in my first race. And the party just became a different party. And I think all candidates now in this new era where the landscape at a national level has shifted dramatically, the Democratic Party today is not the Democratic Party it was 10 years ago, and certainly isn't the Democratic Party it was, when John F. Kennedy was ushering in tax cuts. And the same is true of the Republican Party. Republican Party today is not the same Republican Party it was when I served in the Justice Department 20 years ago as part of the Bush administration. It's changed. So there's been a realignment, and I think both major party candidates today are trying to tap into, the constituent parts of the new parties and doing it in ways that they think will pay off on Election Day. But it's sort of exciting to see the different creative ways that the candidates are trying to, Trump and McDonald's. Can you imagine Mitt Romney in McDonald's? That just wouldn't work. But it works for him. And then, he does a lot of other things, but Kamala Harris does, Vice President Harris does the same thing, with rappers. And how many of you you probably don't even remember Michael Dukakis, but anybody, Dukakis ring a bell to anybody? But how many of you think he'd have rappers on the stage? That wouldn't work for Dukakis. So there's this constant evolution and constant effort by candidates to sort of tap into the different newer constituent parts of their party. It's exciting to see. I think it's a good thing.
Yeah, and different things are working. I mean, Trump at McDonald's, but then immediately Kamala started dissing him or her campaign. They're all watching each other and trying to play off each other. But Trump on Joe Rogan.
Right.
I think that's going to be tomorrow. So he's trying to do some things outside the box, but it is trying to stay relevant, stay with the new voters, and thinking about I watched recently an old clip of Clinton giving his State of the Union. He sounds like a Republican. That's what's so crazy is how these parties really are. They're different than the ones that we grew up with, and different from the ones we started in. So it's just interesting to watch this evolution, and it's going to be interesting to see. You've seen Trump's getting a lot of the black voters, a lot of the Hispanic voters. It's just watching this in real time has been fascinating.
I'm not sure what's working for them, or if any of what they're doing is working, which is why they're doing everything. And that's one of the things in a campaign. You don't know, it's like marketing. You don't know what's going to work, so you just keep doing everything you can to engage voters. I can't imagine what it's like to run a statewide race, much less a national race. When you run a local race, going out and talking to people and knocking on doors is the way you connect with people. In a statewide and in a national race, you can't do that. So they're depending on surrogates to do those things and get out there. And what's interesting now, you talk about getting text messages, and we talk about polling. I was at an event with Dr. Holsworth, and we were talking about polling. And I don't see how you can trust any polling now because people don't answer the phone. And they don't have enough text numbers to get a good sampling. And really, polling's only good now for initially when you go out and poll, so you can poll messaging to see how you need to message for your campaign versus seeing how people are going to vote. So I don't trust the polls. And when you look at this election, and you look at other elections, there were events that happened that swayed the election. Ronald Reagan saying, hey, I won't hold the youth and inexperience of my opponent against him when they were talking about his age. That right there won a debate for him and kind of turned the election. And there are other things that have happened in past elections that really turned the election. Nixon and Kennedy, people that watched it on TV thought Kennedy won. People that listened to it thought Nixon won. Where I'm going with that, when you look at this race, Trump and Biden had a debate, and we're going, race is over, Trump's going to win. 2 weeks later, you're going, race is over, Harris is going to win. And he got shot in there, and I mean, it's gone back and forth where it looked like one or the other had it hands down. You can't ever give up. You can't ever let up until you get, that's the one thing that people were telling me at the end, keep knocking doors, keep working. Whatever your campaign is and whatever you think's working or other things you're going to try, you've got to run all the way through the tape to get there. And I guess we're going to take a poll here to see who we think's going to win, because
Sure.
I have no clue. Again, like I said, I was at the polls today in Henrico County, which Henrico County used to be a staunch Republican area when I grew up. It no longer is. It is voted for, starting with Obama. It voted for Obama, and since then it's been Democrat. Today, the people out there working me are telling me the majority of the people coming in are voting for Donald Trump. Now, that's anecdotal. I don't think I believe it. But I think Donald Trump will be a lot closer in Virginia than it was Biden last time was 10 points that he lost by. So
I want to add to that, and just anecdotally, I have a daughter lives in Washington, D.C., and last weekend I was there all weekend and taking Ubers everywhere. Every Uber, Morocco driver, Ethiopian driver, and there was Ghana, and there was one more. All of them are voting for Trump. I could not believe it, and they all had their reasons. They were all they're business people. And I was so surprised by their just very seriously voting for Trump. Interesting.
Just in terms of like being creative and finding something that's going to work for your campaign, and former President Trump and Vice President Harris are certainly trying a lot of different things now to get people involved and energized about their campaign down the stretch. But I remember when I first ran, a meeting in the RPV headquarters, Republican Party of Virginia headquarters, and the then director of the party said, I want every candidate in this room, as a room like this, we're all running for House of Delegates or Senate. He said, I want every candidate in this room to submit their campaign plan to me by July 31st. And I'm like, campaign?
I plan to win, right? That was your
Right, I'm
plan?
trying to win. I mean, that's my plan. So I put together a 2-page plan with my campaign manager who had just graduated from UVA. He was like 24 years old. And so we put together a 2-page plan and we faxed it down to Richmond. And this guy named Chris LaCivita, who's running Trump's campaign now,
Yep.
received my campaign plan. He was not impressed. And so he got on the phone and he called Phil and just gave him the blues. And I was out, all over the county that day, and I came back to the campaign headquarters at the end of the day, and Phil was red-faced and looked flustered. So, how was your day? And he's like, well, some guy named LaCivita called me and said, our campaign plan sucks. And he said, what do you want me to do? And I said, double space it.
Write one that doesn't suck, right?
Double space it and send it back to him. He was like, are you serious? I'm like, yeah, do that. So I did it. And I never heard from Richmond again, which was the goal. But
stopped
our
asking
campaign
for
plan
it.
was really simple. Sometimes you overcomplicate things. And the candidate sometimes will stumble upon something that he or she feels is really working for his or her campaign. And for me, it was what we call coffees and teas. So the 2 pages I was talking about was just a list of coffees and teas that we had planned. I know that sounds kind of odd, but what it was basically is I would find someone in the county who was, and what I try to do is somebody who lived in a really nice home and then ask them to have like a coffee or tea, and they'd say, oh, sure, I'd love to. You invite who you want, just let me know time, date, blah, blah, blah. And then I would tell folks, hey, I'm having a coffee and tea, and they're like, oh, yeah, okay, where is it? And then I tell them, it's at so-and-so's house. And they're like, oh, yeah. Oh, I want to go to that. And so then we'd have one there. And then someone at that coffee would say, hey, I want to hold one of these at my house. I was like, oh, sure, we can do it. And it just took off. And it became the thing to do in Albemarle County. And so we were having these coffees and teas all over the county, like every single day almost. And we were just building our campaign, building it, and the momentum was, and the people who had never been involved in politics before, all of a sudden found a fun way to get involved in politics, and that's how we were able to drive up our margins. But it's simple. Sometimes you do find something that works for your campaign, and when you do it, you just keep doing it over and over again. I think the rallies for Trump is
For him.
the secret sauce. I think he feels like that's his secret sauce.
Yeah, well, already we've talked a lot about minority voting blocs and how campaigns are on both sides trying to appeal to them. And in recent years, the Republican Party, especially under former President Trump, have made serious progress in building support among African American and Latino voters, a voting bloc that has historically been very loyal to the Democratic Party. What are some of the methods that you all have personally employed in your campaigns to win the support of minorities? And do you think this trend for the Republican Party will continue in the future?
Well, I'll kick that off. I've been frustrated over decades at so-called Republican outreach efforts. I've never liked that term. I worked on outreach efforts at the Republican National Committee in Washington when I was in law school and found, some spare time. But I've never liked the idea that this is just, a sort of focused minority outreach effort that requires a different messaging for different and discrete groups that we would want to bring into the party. The best way to reach, I think, minority groups in blacks and Latino, I think, are the two groups that you mentioned. Simple. Take the conservative message and the same message to the same groups because they're interested in the same things. They want lower taxes. They want quality schools for their kids. They want opportunities, fewer regulations so they can maximize their God-given talents and abilities. They don't want to be dependent on government. They want to live independent lives for themselves. And I think that if you just, first of all, you have to show up in the communities. That's number one. Not every 4 years, but on a consistent basis. And it's hard to do that unless you really care. I mean, deep down inside of you, you care about your community, all of your community, including Black and Latino communities and neighborhoods. But if you genuinely care about all the people in your district, you go to all the people in your district on a consistent basis. And I did that. I mean, not just in my district, but I love going to public housing complexes in Norfolk, in Northern Virginia, Philadelphia. I traveled around with Jack Kemp. We were like evangelizing. We were just out talking about conservative principles with passion and conviction and talking about school choice to the Black community that just ate it up because they could not understand from a moral perspective how it was right for wealthier families in the country to have the option to send their kids to the school they thought would best educate them. But poor and minority communities in the country don't have the same opportunity. That's simple. Now, why Republicans and conservatives just don't go out and engage with communities and say that is beyond me. They're rife for that. And Trump is finding that out. He says it. The reason he's connecting is he's authentic. He doesn't change his message. It's a message about opportunity. It's not about government dependent, not about program. This generation, the younger generation of Black and Latino leaders that don't want to hear about government programs. They have gifts and talents, and they've traveled the world. They have exposure through technology to see what can be done. They see the possibilities, and they want it for themselves, and they want it for their kids. They don't want some, politician saying, "I'm going to pass this program to give you X." That's not working anymore. They want fewer regulations. They want good schools. They want the choice where they send their kids to school. And they want a fair justice system, And those are things that connect. And if you just go out and listen and engage with folks, you'd be actually surprised with how much traction you can get. But I think, Trump saw an uptick last election in 2020. He got more of the African-American vote than he got in 2016. And he's probably going to get more in 2024 than he got in 2020. That's what it looks like. But it's not because he's a genius, other than the fact that he's figured out, hey, I'm going to go and engage with people, and I'm going to be honest, and I'm going to be frank, and I'm going to talk about opportunities, and people resonate. That resonates with people.
I agree 100%. And they no matter what your race is, your color is, you want the same thing. And I think it's interesting if you ever hear Winsome Sears, our lieutenant governor, and A.C. Cardozo, who serves in the House with us on the Republican side, both of them have kind of similar stories. Winsome was watching, in fact, it was Dukakis and Bush, and she was watching an ad, and Bush's ad said something about, if you're on welfare, you have no legacy to pass on to your children. And she said that she just thought she was supposed to be a Democrat. And then after she heard that, she said, well, wait, I don't believe that. And I don't want to be that. And then she started investigating it and realized she was a conservative. And A.C. Cardozo was in college, and he said that he just assumed he was supposed to be a Democrat. And he had a professor and said, what do you believe? And the professor started pushing him and said, do you believe this? Do you believe that? Individual freedom? Do you believe in limited government? Do you believe in peace through strength? Like all the Republican core values. And AC was like, yes. He's a gun owner. He likes Second Amendment. And the professor was like, I hate to tell you, but you're a Republican. So I think it just, not assuming, and just give the same
I had a
message.
similar epiphany as AC had. So I went off to college from public housing here in Charlottesville. Went to Hampton University, which is an HBCU. And I loved Reagan, really from high school. He was able to connect with things that the folks that were elders in the church and in my community said to me all the time, like, get off your butt and go to work. And, serving in the military, that was an honorable thing. And dream big, dream big, think big. Paul, you can do great things. So somebody who sort of spoke that sort of optimism as Reagan did, he was able to connect with me as, a 16, 17-year-old kid. So I went off to college, and I liked Reagan. I liked Alexander Haig more than I liked Reagan. He was a sharp dresser. He served in the military, and I just sort of liked his persona. So I remember it was like in the fall of 1983. I was sitting in class at Hampton University, and I used to wear my Army ROTC uniform even on days we didn't have drill, just to get under the skin of my professors, 'cause they hated that. And so I'm sitting in class. I'm in the back of the class, and we're talking about the U.S. invasion in Grenada. President Reagan had sent the 82nd Airborne there to rescue U.S. Medical students. And so the professor was, and she said, so what do you all think about this latest action by the imperialist Reagan? And then you hear all these different views, but mostly the same. They were just condemning Reagan. And so I raised my hand, and she called on me, and I said this to be provocative, so I didn't really mean it, but I said, I don't think Reagan went far enough. I think he should have nuked the island. And then we just sort of used Grenada as a parking lot, staging, and then we go after Cuba next. And she lost it. And she had an eraser in her hand, and she threw it at me in the back of the room, and it hit the wall. Fortunately, it didn't hit me. But she threw an eraser at me, and then she started pointing her finger. She's like, there's a word for people who believe in this kind of stuff you believe in. And in my smart, alecky way, I said, well, what's that? And she said, you're a Republican. And then she said, come see me after class. And I thought, well, it's over. I'm flunking this class. And I went to see her after class, and to her everlasting credit, she gave me this book about the origins of political parties in America. And she's like, if you have those views, you should understand what the differences are historically and current differences between the two parties. So read this book and come back and let me know what you think. And I read it, and I said, this is great. You're right. I think I do belong in the Republican Party. And then I started reading Thomas Sowell and some other, but that was the beginning of my journey. But that happened at an HBCU, and to that professor's everlasting credit, I mean, she encouraged me to pursue my own interest in a way that I felt comfortable with. She didn't try to impose her views on me and her political orientation on me, but she allowed me as a student to grow in and to pursue something that naturally came to me. So I give her a lot of credit for that. That stuck with me, and I think that should be a fairly common feature in higher education, that you don't impose your views on folks, you have robust discussions, but you really want your students to flourish and grow in their own unique ways. So I'm always grateful for doing that.
And you make a great point there, and what we've said when you talk about engaging minorities. The issue is, go to where they are, tell them your values, and let them measure their values against you. And they can determine whether they're Republicans or whether they're Democrats. I mean, that's really what you just said. And fortunately, you had an instructor there that didn't hit you with an eraser, but came to you and said, called you the R word. Did that brand you for the whole class, I assume? But really, look at your values measured against the values of whoever you align with. And good Lord, please don't believe the political ads that are on TV. you talked earlier about when you ran your campaign, you didn't do anything negative. And I had a unique campaign myself, and my campaign got international news, and I had every opportunity to go absolutely negative on my candidate. And I had everybody telling me I should, and I absolutely did not do that because it would have hurt her family. And unfortunately, she didn't have the same tactic or same thought. But please, when you're looking at your values measured against a candidate's values that you want to vote for, do your research. Don't believe the ads. And we talked about mailers. I mean, my gosh, it's all, we send out mailers, and we're counting on someone reading it from the mailbox to the trash can, because that's where they go. You sort your mail now over the trash can, whether it's catalogs or whether it's mailers. So whatever that message is, it's clean and crisp. And unfortunately, so many of them are negative. And as you said, you didn't go negative, I didn't go negative, but unfortunately, it's proven that going negative works. That's unfortunate. And I want to say this, you know, we talk about the animosity in politics, and I think Delegate Tato will agree with me. Sure, do we have some dust-ups in the Virginia House of Delegates? Yeah, but for the most part, it's collegial. We follow Mr. Jefferson's rules, and we disagree on things, but we disagree civilly. And we need to carry that when we're at the doors. I mean, I knocked on 9,500 doors during my campaign, personally. And I had 3 people that were rude to me. One person wagging their finger in my face, another one telling me everything I believed, and one other that said he'd never vote for a Republican. I mean, out of 9,500, that's pretty good odds that for the most part it was civil. And for the most part, people are civil when you're civil to them and polite. I can agree as politely as anybody else in the world. And when we walk away, we know what our values are and where we think. But again, whether it's, to your point, your message is your message, period, end of story, and go to where your constituents are and go to where your voters are and let them measure their values against your message. I think it's pretty simple.
Very valuable insights. And man, you must have gone through a lot of walking shoes doing 95
3 pair.
doors. Wow.
3
pairs. So let's do one more question before we hand it off to the audience to submit their questions. Let's turn now our attention to increasing voter turnout. So since the COVID-19 pandemic, many states, including Virginia, have heavily encouraged citizens to vote early or cast their ballots by mail. A large portion of voters seem to approve of these easier ways to vote and continue to use them in record numbers. Democrats have also been highly effective at convincing their base to vote early. Should the Republican Party continue to encourage its base to vote early or use mail-in ballots? And if so, what are some methods that can be implemented to ensure that the Republican early voting numbers get on par with the Democrats?
So the answer to the first question is yes. I think we have to encourage our voters as Republicans to get out and vote early. I mean, this is the system that we have now, whether we like it or not. We can't just sort of sit at home and bemoan the fact that, you know, these new rules are in place and not vote as sort of a protest against the new rules. That doesn't make a lot of sense. If you want to change the rules, you got to get people in office that believe the same way you do, and the way you do that is by getting out to vote. And how do you get people to sort of buy into this new approach? I think you have to explain it sort of just the way I did. Like, this is why, explain to them why it's important, notwithstanding their misgivings about the new rules, why it's important for them to get out and vote if they really want to effect change to do that. I will just add that one of the problems that I have with the new rules that are in place in many states, early voting, no ID, drop boxes, et cetera, a lot of these rules came into place during the COVID era. My trouble with a lot of them is that they are not rules that were established by the legislatures of the state. So you have secretaries of states or secretaries of election boards in various states who on their own, sort of sua sponte, decided that here's a new set of rules for voting, during this period. And a lot of them don't have any sunset dates. So these are, they've become permanent rules and permanent changes to the way we're voting. To me, that's anti-democratic. We have an elected state legislature for a reason, to pass laws and to pass rules that govern the way that the state citizens vote. And it's a disrespect of the state legislature for these election bodies, boards of elections, to assume for themselves the authority to decide what the rules are going to be in their state. We've got to get away from that and get it back into the legislature. But in the meantime, you need an army of young people, energetic people who are willing to go out and knock on doors, make phone calls, and explain to people in small groups and large groups why it's important to get out and vote early. And in some cases, you can show them data. Look, we lost this election because we didn't get out and vote early. We thought we were going to win this. We thought there was going to be some sort of red wave that didn't materialize because a lot of you sat back and, as an expression of your dissatisfaction with the new rules, just decided to stay home. If we keep doing that, we're going to keep losing elections. If you want to win elections, you got to get out and vote so we can change the rules, we get the right leaders in place.
Yeah, we have no choice but to do the early voting. And talk about door knocking, you get those staunch Republicans, and they do not like it at all. They like to go on Election Day, and they always have their whole day planned, and that's what we as Republicans do. But he's right. If we lost the election, we didn't take it seriously right away, and we were playing catch-up still. But it's gotten a lot better already. Once early voting started, and I agree 100% with 45 days is just too much. That's too long. I mean, early voting, 2 weeks max. But it is what it is, and until we have the new people in office, it's going to be this way. So we're not going to beat them at this point, so we have to join them, and we have to do it better. And so that's what we're trying to do, and that's our focus this year.
Absolutely. We've got to embrace the rules as they are as Republicans. And I'll give you an example. In the district I represent, there are 513 hard Republicans that are low propensity voters. And that means they have voted in one of the last 4 elections. I won by 721 votes. It's pretty simple math. If I can go get those 513 people to vote for me in those off election year when they typically do not, I can hopefully win re-election and win re-election by more votes. So I've got a list of those people. I'm going to their doors, knocking on their doors and asking them to sign up for permanent absentee voting. Because there's got to be a reason they're not voting. And that's what the Democrats have done. And when you look at results from the election last year for the House, the Virginia House, and the Virginia State Senate, you'll see that the races that we won as Republicans, we won on Election Day. We pretty much won in-person early voting as well. We lost on the mail-in voting, and it's pretty much because of the permanent absentee. And I truly believe the Democrats have mined all they're going to mine out of that group. We've got more opportunities than the Democrats do to bring those people in. And we talked about the values and where we think the political things are going with Trump gaining voters with Hispanics and African Americans, and it's back to some values. And if we get out there and explain our values and ask them to sign up and vote for us, typically we're going to get them. I've got 20% Asians in my district, a lot of people from India that have come here. And their values are similar to Republicans, but when it comes to voting, I've had them tell me this, I will go vote if I'm not working that day or have something important in my business or something going on with my family. Voting is not a high priority for them. And this is not me speculating. This is me having conversations, asking people why you haven't voted. And I've asked them to sign up for the permanent absentee, and some have done that, because now they're going to get a ballot in the mail, and it makes it easier for them, and we get more people voting. Because what we want everybody that's eligible, registered to vote, and everybody that's registered voting, and we're nowhere near that now, so.
Very interesting, and we'll certainly see, how those trends play out. I think it's, early voting is here to stay. So now let's turn it over to our great audience tonight for some questions. Please kind of keep your questions germane to the main themes of tonight. But would anybody like to go first?
I think this student has left, but the question is a good one, and I think it will sort of inform the room. How much does it cost to run for your seat, and how much do you get paid for doing it?
Too much and not enough.
Well, yeah,
So-
we have two different campaigns,
Well-
because he was in a very tight district, so yours was probably a lot more than mine.
So I spent $1,200,000 on my race. My opponent spent $1.8 million. And that was one of the less expensive races in the competitive seats. Kim Taylor, who's down in the Petersburg area and won by 38, 40 votes, there was a recount. She spent $2 million on her race. How much do I get paid? I think it's somewhere in a 17.5, 17.5.
17,000.
This cost me money to do. I've got $90,000 personally my own money in this at this point. So I'm obviously not doing this. It's not a get-rich-quick scheme where I raise $1.2 million. We spend every penny of it. So it's expensive, and you're going to have a completely different
Yeah,
answer.
so my first race, I spent about $500,000 because I had a primary. And then the next time I ran, I didn't have a primary, and it is a more Republican, so I spent about $300,000. So mine, because it was they called it a safe district, but all that money we had to raise ourselves.
Right.
So,
Yeah, and I think when I ran in 1997, we probably spent somewhere around between 250 and 300,000 for the campaign. About 1/6 of that I got from one donor, because there are no campaign limits in Virginia.
Correct.
So I had this guy named Halsey Minor. He wrote me a check for $50,000.
wow.
So he called me on the phone. He's like, I was headed back from Greene County. He said, have your person call my person tomorrow because I'm going to wire you $50. And I'm like, $50? Why is he wiring me $50? But I didn't want to be rude. I'm like, I'll take whatever anybody wants to give to me. So I said, okay, sure. So I asked my legislative aide to call Halsey the next day, and she did. And lo and behold, he sent $50,000,
Wow.
wired it into my bank account. So of course, the media got hold of that. And they were like, oh, you get money from California and yada, yada, yada. Well, Halsey and I had played Little League Baseball together, and we had been friends all our lives. He was gone on to be very successful in the tech world. But yeah, he sent me a check for, that was a record for the House of Delegates that year. I don't know if it's been broken yet, but one donor for.
Can I get his phone number?
But that was a tremendous shot in the arm. But yeah, you have to raise the money by yourself, on your own. And I don't think they've moved the salary. I think we made
Yeah. 18.
about
I think it's
17.
gone down.
Wow.
Yeah, when I was in office. So
Yeah.
So to follow up on that, though, the majority of that money is spent on, for me, was spent on TV ads.
Yeah.
It's over 650,000, almost 700,000 spent on TV ads.
And I didn't do any ads.
Right. So that's really the differential between the two races. And again, it depends on whether you're in a competitive seat or not. And during campaign season, I made a comment earlier about having an election every year. The consultants love it, as do the TV stations and the radio stations. So unfortunately, there is too much money in politics. There's just too much money in it. I wish we could fix that, but I'd love to hear somebody have a solution to it.
And I don't think people realize, and this is a good opportunity for you to explain, you can't live on $17,000
No.
a year. We have a part-time legislature
Yes.
in Virginia.
Yes.
I think increasingly, though, you're there a lot longer than,
Oh, yeah.
It's full-time
It-
hours, but it is a part-time. We're citizen legislators, which honestly that's going back to the founders. You're supposed to come to the state capitol, make the laws, and then go back and till your land and run your, law practice and run your store. And it really needs to stay that way. And we've heard some of our Democrat friends who we need to make this a full-time legislature. And I'm like, no, we don't. We should always be part-time legislators. But it takes, I do actually have a day job, believe it or not. I have a day job. And trying to juggle it all, it takes a lot. But that's the only way. It needs to stay that way, I strongly believe.
Well, since we are part-time, which means this year will be what's called a short session, so we'll be down there 45 days, and the long sessions were down there 60 days. It forces things to happen. So in the first half of the term, when we're down there, we're hearing bills on our side, and anything that doesn't get passed on the House side before crossover, where we send bills over to the other house, they die. So if you don't get the work done, it runs like a rocket ship down there, which is different than Congress. They're full-time. If they don't get something done, they go home for recess and come back and it's still there to work on. We have deadlines. We have to get it done. So that's a huge advantage of being a part-time legislature. If it was full-time and more pay, and that becomes the profession, then we just get more bureaucracy. So I don't want to see it change.
I do want to say two things that I really love about that Virginia does, and I think does really well, and Washington could learn from us. One, it's in our Constitution, we have to balance our budget. That's like the law. And then two, we have a thing in Virginia where the bills have to be germane. So your bill, if you propose a bill, it has to be about the one item that it's about. And that's why in Congress, they have these ginormous bills that, the infrastructure bill, it was like only 23% of that bill actually had to do with infrastructure. But they tack on all these other things, and that causes all kind of trouble. But our bills are like this, because it's one thing and it's got to be germane. And they will have arguments on the House floor where all the lawyers go to the front and argue, that's not germane, that is germane. But it's a great thing, it's a great system.
And we have regular order.
Yeah.
which means what?
So regular order means that when we introduce a bill, we come up with a concept, we introduce the bill, and then in the House, the bill goes to the speaker, to the clerk, and then the speaker determines what committee it goes to, and then it'll go to a subcommittee. So the bills have to go through subcommittee, full committee, get to the House, go through 3 readings in the House, and pass the House. The system's designed to kill bills. Then once it goes to the House, it goes over to the Senate committee, 3 readings at the Senate, and if it passes both houses, it'll go to the governor, and if he signs it, it then becomes a bill, or he can veto it. So in Congress, they don't have regular order. They'll send things right to the floor without going through committee, and a lot of things don't get hearings. So that's why Congress gets a lot less done than we get done at the General Assembly.
So I know in the House this year there were a lot of 49-51 split votes. What's the best way to sway the left to vote yes on your bill? Does it come down to personal relationships?
Absolutely, absolutely. That's a great question. And everything, I mean, honestly,
Threats.
but you might as well learn this now. Everything is relationships, everything. And yeah, we've had a lot of bills that you can get changed because of the relationships you have. Lobbyists actually really help too. Lobbyists, you can work with the lobbyists and find out who is closest to whom, and you can work those relationships, but absolutely, that's the way to get it done.
You heard me mention earlier, there were 34 new delegates that came in, and because of exactly what Delegate Tata said, I made sure I got to know every one of them. And I had bills that went through one committee that all got killed, except for one that got to the floor, then they killed it on 3rd reading, because that was the day they killed all Republican bills. But had nothing to do with policy. But the committee that I had better relationships with, that's where I got bills passed. And I went and spoke to every one of those delegates. I worked my bills. Unfortunately, I went in to talk to one delegate, and I said, hey, I want to talk to you about this bill. And he says, I don't deal with policy. Go see my chief of staff, which really bothered me. I'm going, that's your job, that's why you should be here. But it truly, if you don't have the relationships and you get a bad reputation, we all have personalities. We all have people we like and dislike. So you want to be down there and be civil and congenial, and you want to have a reputation that when you tell somebody you're going to do something, you do it.
Well, in that quote, and I always attribute it to Reagan, but I don't know that he actually said it, but if you don't care who gets the credit, you can do a lot of great things. And, you know, like this time, I had a bill for my city that was really important to our city. I knew as a Republican, we were in the minority, I was not going to get it. You know, I knew they would probably kill it because of my, you know, I'm a Republican. So I took it to a Democrat patron, and I said, will you carry this? Because I just wanted it passed, and I didn't care, you know, if I got the credit or not. So, and again, but having that relationship, I was able to ask them to do it, and they did it.
Right.
Yeah, would you like to go?
So, Tyler, I know you've asked us to keep these questions germane, and excuse me, sorry. A lot of the time when I'm talking to my friends who aren't as engaged, and they're like, "Oh, why would I vote? What does that have to do with me?" And my thing is always, "Okay, what do you care about?" And for a lot of students, the answer is rent. Rent's really expensive. And so whenever we're talking about why vote, I always connect it to whatever people already care about, which say whatever it is, right, that's to do with politics. I'm president of a CIO on grounds that tries to take students to the state legislature, make sure legislators are hearing from young folks. And one of the issues we're working on right now is a piece of legislation that basically allows churches and religious organizations that if they have extra land, that it just allows them to build affordable housing
Right.
for a lot of folks. There are a lot of reasons why rented prices are high, and I'm no expert, but more stock probably could help. So my question is really, what would you say for people who are worried about affordable housing, and specifically that piece of legislation?
Well, having spent 20 years of my career in the home building business and being president of the Home Building Association of Virginia and being their legislative chairman for many years and working on legislation, first of all, what is affordable housing? And the answer is whatever you can personally afford. And it is a huge issue and something that needs to get fixed. Now, we've dug this hole over the last 2 decades. We built more houses in the 1960s than we did in the 2010s. We are still not up to building the number of homes we built in 2004 and 5 in the Commonwealth of Virginia. So we have a supply-demand issue. And when you hear people talk about increased credits for people to buy homes or give them money to buy homes, that will make the problem worse because we're increasing the demand without changing the supply. So the short answer for the solution is we've got to increase the supply. The bill you're talking about is actually a bill that was up last year, and it wants to make those properties by right, which means they do not have to get any rezoning. And there are a lot of places where we'd like to have by right zoning because localities, when I go back to saying who has the most impact on your lives, one of the biggest things that local government does is the process of zoning. Yeah, absolutely. And unfortunately, we have a lot of NIMBYs, not in my backyard. There's now a group called YIMBYs, yes, in my backyard. As a matter of fact, I've met with them. And for decades, we've said we want these communities to be sprawling, big houses, and we want big square footage because they think that means we are an affluent locality. And density becomes a 4-letter word to a lot of these localities. So people have to have the intestinal fortitude at those zoning cases to approve some zoning and increase some density, whether we do it through by right zoning, which is what you're saying here. As a matter of fact, there's a project in Henrico County where the church sold back part of their parking lot, and there are 40 townhouses going up there. And Henrico County also has a program they've put into place where they're taking money from the taxes they're generating from the data centers and plowing that back in to buy down the cost of the land for those homes to be built in. And that project on that church lot has got 4 homes in there that will be classified as affordable housing. There's another project called the Maggie Walker Project where they will own the land in perpetuity and the house gets built on it. Because where the majority of the housing cost is that has increased over the years is in the land. And it's because we have constrained supply. I mean, y'all, there are probably economics people in here, and supply and demand is as simple as it gets. So we've got to release the constraint, and it's not going to get fixed easily. There's no silver bullet. And I had the 4 bills last year that would improved the cost of housing that all got defeated because I'm David Owen in a Republican seat that they want to win. So unfortunately, that's politics. And as you mentioned, I'm working with Democrats on the other side. When you're in the majority, you can steal bills from the other side.
Oh, yeah.
And I had,
had some stolen.
one of the guys I made good friendship with on the other side, he stole multiple bills. And I walked up to him one day and I said, "Why didn't you steal any of mine?" He goes, "I didn't understand any of them." So I said, "Look, I'll explain them to you. We'll get them passed next year." And actually, there's a senator that's in Henrico that's a Democrat, and he and I are working on housing bills, trying to get the cost down. So,
Regulations.
did I answer your question?
So I'm hearing it, yes.
I'd want to look at the bill, but we looked at it last year. There were a couple issues with it that I think we can clean up and fix it.
This year, I'll send your office a copy. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks, that's awesome you're doing that.
I think we've got time for one more question.
Okay.
Yes, sir. Would you like to go?
So I just have a pitch, and so you can have time for one more question.
Okay.
I'm Larry Roberts. I'm the director of the Sorensen Institute for Political Leadership. One of our interns is here. And we bring people together across the partisan aisle, across regional differences, to try to get things done with trust, civility, and respect. I want to let you know we have a Sorensen alum in the House of Delegates, and Delegate Tata, and one of our former advisory board members in Delegate Harris. What I want to let you know is we have a college program in the summer to do a sort of a waterfront look at a different public policy issue, and this summer our program is on housing and land use.
Wow.
So we try to present all sides of the issues, bring different pieces of the industry or the advocacy groups in to talk with you all, and we take 30 college students, mostly from UVA through Handshake. So I hope some of you will look into that. We'll probably have information out about it in February.
I want to back that up. That was one of the most amazing programs. I did it in like 2010 when I was in the background, never thinking I was going to be a candidate. And they brought, it was like half Republicans, half Democrats, and then like 4 or 5 independents. And you travel the state, you meet, I don't know if they still do it, but you travel the state once a month, you were in a different location. So during that year, I learned in Bristol, Virginia, that's where country music started. I never knew that before. You go to the port, you go everywhere. But one of my best memories of that, the very first day we were all gathered, I think in Williamsburg, and the very first day they had a flip chart, and they said, okay, everyone who's a Republican, like when you think Democrat, what do you think? And it was like, you can imagine all the things, you know. And then they said, okay, Democrats, when you think Republican, what do you think? And then, you know, but it was so interesting how we were all in there together. And then over the year, you just really got to know, you know, everybody. You got to see both sides. And what another favorite part of this, and I hope they still do this, but like when there was a big issue, like during that time, it had been the shooting at Virginia Tech. And they brought in both Republican and I don't even remember who the governor was at the time, but they brought in people from different parties about how they worked together to address something that affected every Virginian. So it is a wonderful, wonderful program. And if you can do it college or even after beyond, I highly, highly recommend it.
All right, and we have time for one more question. Would you like to go?
Yes, thank you very much.
Gwen.
Hi, my name is Gwen Cassidy. I'm a double who. I have a couple of quick questions. The first one is, on average, how many bills actually pass each session?
Was there
We're about 3,000 are introduced and about
800, 700 or 800
Yeah,
actually.
700, 800
passed.
got through
Yeah.
this year. 210 or so got vetoed.
So my next
A lot of them
question
you never
is,
hear, you never see.
how does a bill become a law? In terms of, I've gone through this process, and this is how I know Delegate Tata, we're working on trying to combat human trafficking. And I am very persistent, and will not stop until we pass new legislation towards this, gross human atrocity. Where do you need to pivot due to your short terms? So where does one need to pivot when trying to get both sides on the aisle, on the same aisle, towards passing a new bill?
Well, kind of what we were talking about before, it's really a team effort. I mean, you have a bill that the lawyers actually write the bill, they propose it, and then it starts going through the process of committee. You start going around individually to the different offices to find out you find out who's going to be on that subcommittee. Then you go to them and you explain your bill and you try to get their support. It's even better if you can get somebody early on from the other side to co-patron with you. And then after that, you have to be a little willing to, they call them friendly amendments, where you have to change a little language, or you have to add something or take something away. And if you're open to those kind of things, there is a way to do it, but that's everything that we do. That's what takes the whole General Assembly time.
How often are bills reintroduced?
They
All the
time.
all the
Yeah.
time.
And sometimes they'll die in a committee, and then you go and talk to the committee chair, and you get some buy-in, and then they can revive it.
But having dealt on the other side where you are advocating with the Home Building Association, you can work for 4 or 5 years on a bill to get it passed. So it's not what happens during session, it's what you do before session. So don't wait until session. You want to know who's on the committee where your bill's going to go. And you need to have an agreement with the speaker where the bill's going to go, and then work those committee people, not when they're down in session, because they're not as busy, and you'll get more time in front of them. And you may get 1 or 2 and need a couple more, but if you keep bringing it back and working it, you'll get it through. I shouldn't say you get it through, but you have a better chance. I mean, we had over 400 bills that were carried over last year that can come back up this year. I had 4 that were killed that I'm planning on reintroducing, and I'm just going to work them differently.
And
Yeah,
go
I'm
ahead.
sorry.
No, go ahead.
Some delegates and senators take a great deal of pride of, how many bills they introduce. I mean, I had seatmates that would introduce like 30 bills, but you got to, track. You got to go to committee meetings, subcommittee meetings to advocate for your bills, which is ridiculous. So, I mean, my goal was when I started, I was like, no more than 5 bills per session. But there was one bill that I carried every year, and I inherited this bill from my predecessor, who had inherited it from his predecessor. But the bill was basically to kick state regulators out of city markets. So some state agency had somebody walking around like city markets, looking at the scales, oh, you want to buy, 8 apples, let's put it on this scale. And the scales had to be calibrated, and they weren't calibrated, and then you get a fine from the state. So the bill was like to tell the state to get out of the city market, because people wanted to sell cheese and whatnot. So there was a lady in Albemarle County who wanted to sell her cheese in city market, and she kept getting harassed by these state regulators. So I carried that bill. That was a standing bill that was going to be one of my 5 bills, every session. I don't think it ever got passed, but.
That sounds like a good bill.
So sometimes you inherit bills from your constituents. That seemed like a good one. I don't know why they have, state regulators in city markets, but they need to get out of there. And then, some bills come to you from groups, and then some bills just sort of appeal to things that you care passionately about. So I carried a lot of charter school bills because I am convinced that I would not be where I am today, but for the fact that I was able to go to the school called Miller School, which is like 20 minutes from where we are right now, 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. But I was given an opportunity to go to Miller School on a scholarship. Otherwise, we couldn't have afforded it. But at Miller, I found it met all of the things that sort of fit my personality, the military discipline and the rigor of and then the high expectations that people had of the cadets there, the sense that you only deserve in life what you earn. I learned that at Miller School. And those are healthy attributes and qualities that have stuck with me all of my life. I wouldn't I doubt I'd have that today, but for that experience at Miller. And it's not good enough that I had that experience. I want it for everybody else. So some bills you carry, like charter school legislation, for me, came from a very personal place of passion.
The only thing I'm going to add is that there are bills that are really good bills. Like I had a bill, there's a great program in the foster care called Fostering Futures, and it's for kids that are aging out, and it takes them to 21, from 18 to 21. So I had a bill that said, you know, they're not really ready at 21, so I wanted to carry it to 23. Everybody agreed, everybody voted on it, but it got killed in appropriations because they didn't have the money for it.
Right.
So the appropriators came to me and they said, look, I'll work with you over the summer. Let's see if we can find money in the budget to pay for that. So sometimes that will be a new bill that I'm going to bring up again, but it's because, you know, I had buy-in, I worked with the stakeholders, and we made some adjustments, and we're going to find the money to do it. So it's all different ways. There's so many different ways to get it done.
I have a last quick question, and I first want to thank you all for your public service. I'm probably the only Democrat in the room, but my question is, thank you.
Welcome. We love you. We love you. I'm glad you claim. Is it Gwen?
Gwen Cassidy.
But wait a
I'm
minute,
so glad
have we converted you yet?
Sorry, I did interview with Donald Trump to be his nanny for Barron back in
Okay.
2012, but I'm still a Democrat.
Okay.
My last question is, why are there only 15 bills allowed to be presented in the every
Short
other, is it every other
Who makes
session?
that rule? I don't know.
I don't know.
I don't know.
It's a
Who
house,
makes-
it's a house rule, and
Yeah.
I think it ought to be limited to 15 or fewer in every session.
Yeah, it's
I mean,
Honestly,
yeah.
what
People
Paul
come to
said,
me-
it's too many
It's
bills.
ridiculous.
It's too
Yeah,
many.
it's too many.
it's too many.
And we
what-
should get rid of laws when we put one on. I'm
Right.
of that. We don't need more laws unless
I-
we get rid of
The
some.
15 limit does not bother me. I will not have 15 bills. And no, I can't carry any of yours.
Thank you all for your public service.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you all for coming out tonight.
Yes, thank you for
Unfortunately, we're out of time, but would you please give a big round of applause for our fantastic panelists? And one final thing, if you'd like more information on the Center for Politics, we have flyers and stickers to our side. And then if you're interested in YAF, please come and see me. Thank you all and have a great night.